The chill of December seeped through the windows of our cozy suburban home in Boston, but I barely noticed it. My mind was preoccupied with the upcoming Christmas trip to Paris that my husband Daniel and I had been planning for months. I hummed softly as I folded another sweater and tucked it into the suitcase sprawled open on our bed. The excitement of spending the holidays in the City of Light had me giddy with anticipation. "Emily," Daniel's voice drifted up from downstairs, interrupting my packing reverie. "Can you come down for a minute? I need to talk to you about something." There was an odd note in his voice that I couldn't quite place, but I brushed it off. Probably just pre-trip jitters, I thought to myself as I made my way downstairs. I found Daniel in our living room, perched on the edge of the sofa, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. The Christmas tree we'd decorated together twinkled merrily in the corner, oblivious to the tension suddenly filling the room. "What's up, honey?" I asked, settling into the armchair across from him. "Did you forget to book the taxi to the airport? Because I can do that right now if No, it's not that," Daniel cut me off, his eyes darting away from mine. He took a deep breath, and I felt a knot of unease begin to form in my stomach. "It's about the trip to Paris." I leaned forward, my brow furrowing. "What about it? Is everything okay?" Daniel ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit I'd seen 1,000 times before. But never like this, never with this palpable sense of guilt hanging in the air between us. "Emily, I don't know how to say this, but the trip to Paris is going to be a family-only thing this year." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. "Family only?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "But Daniel, I am family. I'm your wife." He winced at my words, and I saw a flicker of shame cross his face. I know. But my mother, she thinks it would be better if it was just us this time. You know, me, her, my sister and her kids." The knot in my stomach tightened into a hard ball of disbelief and anger. "Your mother thinks..." "Daniel, we've been planning this trip for months. I've been helping you with everything, the packing lists, the hotel bookings, even those surprise dinner reservations at that little bistro near the Eiffel Tower. How can you suddenly tell me I'm not welcome?" Daniel's shoulders slumped, but his next words made my blood run cold. "Mom thinks well, she said you'd ruin the vibe of the family Christmas. She wants it to be like old times, just us." I stood up abruptly, my hands shaking. "And you're okay with this? You're okay with excluding your wife from a family trip because your mother said so?" "Emily, please try to understand," Daniel pleaded, finally meeting my eyes. "It's complicated with Mom, you know that. She's been having a hard time since Dad passed away, and this trip means a lot to her. Maybe you could use the time to relax, enjoy some peace and quiet. Stop." I cut him off, my voice trembling with fury. "Just stop, Daniel. I can't believe you're doing this to me. I can't believe you're choosing your mother over your wife. Again." I turned and stormed out of the room, leaving Daniel calling after me. But I couldn't bear to hear any more of his weak excuses. As I climbed the stairs back to our bedroom, I felt as if each step was carrying me further away from the life I thought we had built together. The next few days passed in a blur of hurt and disbelief. I watched in silent agony as Daniel packed his bags, carefully folding the holiday sweaters I had bought for him, tucking away the guidebooks we had pored over together. Each item that went into his suitcase felt like another betrayal, another reminder of the Christmas I was being denied. The morning of their departure arrived all too soon. I stood at the window, watching as Daniel loaded the car with his mother, Lillian, hovering nearby. She caught sight of me and had the audacity to wave, a smug smile playing on her lips. I turned away, unable to bear the sight of her triumph. As the car pulled out of the driveway, I felt something inside me crack. This wasn't the first time Lillian had come between us, but it was by far the most blatant. And Daniel had let it happen. He had chosen her over me, leaving me alone for Christmas while he gallivanted around Paris with his real family. The house felt impossibly empty in the days that followed. I wandered from room to room, surrounded by the decorations we had put up together, each bauble and string of lights a painful reminder of the Christmas I was supposed to be having. I tried to distract myself. I baked cookies, I watched cheesy holiday movies, I even attempted to read the novel I'd been saving for the flight to Paris. But nothing could fill the aching void left by Daniel's betrayal. One evening, as I sat alone by the fireplace nursing a glass of wine, my phone buzzed with a notification. Against my better judgment, I looked. It was a post from Daniel on social media, a picture of him and Lillian in front of the Eiffel Tower, both grinning widely. The caption read, "The perfect family Christmas. Just what we needed this year." I stared at the photo, feeling a fresh wave of hurt and anger wash over me. Perfect family Christmas? And what was I? The disposable wife, left behind because I didn't fit into Lillian's idea of family. As the days crept by and New Year's Eve approached, I found myself doing a lot of thinking. About my marriage, about my place in Daniel's life, about the countless times I had bent over backwards to accommodate Lillian's whims and Daniel's inability to stand up to her. And slowly, through the fog of hurt and betrayal, a realization began to dawn. This wasn't just about a trip to Paris. This was about years of disrespect, of being treated as an outsider in my own marriage. It was about Daniel consistently choosing his mother's happiness over mine, about Lillian's constant undermining of our relationship. And I had let it happen, time and time again. But not anymore. As I watched the ball drop on TV, alone in our living room while Daniel celebrated on the Champs-Élysées, I made a decision. This would be the last time I allowed myself to be pushed aside, the last time I accepted being treated as less than family. When Daniel returned, things were going to change. I didn't know exactly what that change would look like yet, but I knew one thing for certain: I was done being the understanding, accommodating wife who always took a backseat to Lillian's demands. It was time to stand up for myself, to demand the respect and consideration I deserved. As the fireworks exploded on the TV screen and cheers echoed from the neighboring houses, I raised my glass in a solitary toast. To new beginnings, I whispered to myself, a spark of determination igniting in my chest. The year ahead would be different, I promised myself. It had to be. Little did I know just how different it would be, or how the choices I was about to make would reshape not just my marriage, but my entire life. As I drifted off to sleep that night, my mind was already formulating a plan that would set in motion a series of events that would change everything. The betrayal of this Christmas had awakened something in me, a strength I didn't know I possessed. And as the new year dawned, I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The Emily who had meekly accepted Lillian's dominance and Daniel's weakness was gone. In her place stood a woman who was prepared to fight for her place in her own life, no matter the cost. The stage was set for a confrontation that had been years in the making. And this time, I wouldn't be the one backing down. The days following Daniel's departure blurred into a haze of emptiness and resentment. Our once cozy Boston home felt cavernous and cold, despite the cheerful decorations that now seemed to mock me at every turn. The twinkling lights on our Christmas tree, which we had lovingly decorated together just weeks ago, now felt like a cruel reminder of the joy I was supposed to be experiencing in Paris. I tried to keep myself busy, to ward off the creeping loneliness that threatened to overwhelm me. I threw myself into baking, filling the kitchen with the scent of gingerbread and cinnamon that usually brought me so much comfort during the holiday season. But as I pulled each batch of cookies from the oven, I couldn't shake the bitter thought that I had no one to share them with. On Christmas Eve, I found myself wandering the empty streets of our neighborhood, bundled up against the biting New England wind. Everywhere I looked, warmth spilled from windows, families gathered around dinner tables, children eagerly awaiting Santa's arrival. The sounds of laughter and holiday music drifted through the air, each note a painful reminder of my solitude. I returned home and poured myself a generous glass of wine, settling into the armchair by the fireplace. The crackling of the flames did little to dispel the chill that had settled deep in my bones. As I sat there, my mind drifted to Paris, imagining the sights and sounds Daniel was experiencing without me. The Eiffel Tower sparkling against the night sky, the aroma of fresh croissants wafting from corner bakeries, the melody of French carols echoing through ancient streets. My reverie was interrupted by the ping of my phone. Against my better judgment, I looked. It was another social media update from Daniel, a photo of him and his family dining at a lavish Parisian café, their table laden with exquisite French delicacies. The caption read, "Christmas Eve dinner with the people who matter most. Feeling blessed." The words hit me like a physical blow. The people who matter most. Was I not one of those people? The wine in my glass suddenly tasted sour, and I set it aside. My appetite vanished. Christmas morning dawned grey and cold. I awoke to an empty house and a hollow feeling in my chest. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine an alternate reality, one where I was waking up in a quaint Parisian hotel room, Daniel's arm draped over me, the excitement of exploring the city of light on Christmas Day buzzing between us. But reality crashed back in as my phone chimed with a perfunctory Merry Christmas text from Daniel. No apology, no acknowledgement of the pain he had caused me. Just 2 words that felt as empty as our house. I spent the day in a daze, going through the motions of a solitary Christmas. I opened the few gifts under the tree, mostly from friends and distant relatives who had no idea of the turmoil in my marriage. Each cheerful card wishing Daniel and me a happy holiday together felt like salt in an open wound. As evening fell, I found myself once again drawn to social media, masochistically scrolling through the flood of happy family photos and festive updates. And there, right at the top of my feed, was another post from Daniel. This time, it was a group shot in front of Notre Dame Cathedral, its Gothic spires reaching into a clear blue sky. The perfect family Christmas, the caption declared. Just what we needed this year. I stared at the image, taking in the details. Daniel's arm was around his mother, Lillian, both of them beaming at the camera. His sister and her children clustered around them, their faces flushed with cold and happiness. They looked like the picture-perfect family, and I was nowhere to be seen. Something inside me snapped at that moment. The hurt and betrayal that had been simmering for days suddenly boiled over into white-hot anger. How dare they? How dare Daniel parade around Paris with his real family, posting about perfection and blessings, while I sat alone in the home we had built together. I picked up my phone, my fingers hovering over the keys. Part of me wanted to unleash my fury, to comment on his post and expose the truth behind his picture-perfect facade. But another part of me, a stronger part, held back. No, I decided. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of knowing how much they had hurt me. Instead, I turned off my phone and tossed it aside. The days between Christmas and New Year's passed in a blur. I alternated between bouts of anger and periods of numbing despair. I tried to distract myself with books, with movies, with long walks through the frost-covered park near our house. But everywhere I went, everything I did, I couldn't escape the gnawing feeling of betrayal. On New Year's Eve, I received an invitation from my friend Sarah to join her and some others for a party. For a moment, I was tempted. The thought of surrounding myself with noise and laughter, of losing myself in the collective excitement of a new year, was appealing. But in the end, I declined. I wasn't ready to put on a brave face and pretend everything was fine. Instead, I found myself once again in front of our fireplace as the final hours of the year ticked away. The house was quiet save for the occasional pop and crackle of the flames. In my hand, I held a glass of champagne, the bottle I had bought months ago, planning to share it with Daniel as we toasted the new year in Paris. As midnight approached, I turned on the TV, more out of habit than any real desire to watch the celebrations. The glittering ball in Times Square seemed a world away from my quiet, empty living room. I watched as the crowd in New York counted down, their excitement palpable even through the screen. 10, 9, 8. I raised my glass, a solitary figure in a sea of emptiness. 7, 6, 5. Unbidden, tears began to roll down my cheeks. 4, 3, 2. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. 1. Happy New Year. As cheers erupted from the TV and fireworks began to explode across the screen, I whispered to myself, Happy New Year, Emily. My voice sounded strange in the quiet room, almost foreign to my own ears. I took a sip of the champagne, its bubbles sharp on my tongue. As I swallowed, I felt something shift inside me. The Emily who had meekly accepted Lillian's dominance, who had repeatedly forgiven Daniel's weakness, who had allowed herself to be pushed to the sidelines of her own marriage, that Emily was gone. In her place stood a woman who was tired of being understanding, tired of making excuses, tired of putting everyone else's happiness before her own. A woman who was ready to demand the respect and consideration she deserved. As the first minutes of the new year ticked by, I made a resolution. This year would be different. This year, I would stand up for myself. This year, I would no longer accept being treated as an afterthought in my own life. I didn't know exactly what that would look like yet. I didn't know what would happen when Daniel returned from Paris, or how I would confront the issues that had been festering in our marriage for far too long. But I knew one thing for certain: things could not go back to the way they were before. The betrayal of this Christmas had awakened something in me, a strength I didn't know I possessed. And as I sat there, watching the New Year's celebrations continue on TV, I felt a sense of calm determination settle over me. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever difficult conversations and decisions awaited me, I was ready to face them. The coming year would undoubtedly bring changes, perhaps even upheaval. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. I raised my glass once more, this time in a toast to myself. To new beginnings, I said aloud, my voice stronger now. To standing up for what I deserve. To no longer accepting less than I'm worth. As I drained the last of my champagne, I felt a spark of excitement ignite in my chest. The year ahead was a blank slate, full of possibilities. And this time, I would be the one writing my own story. Little did I know just how dramatically that story was about to change. The stage was set for a confrontation that had been years in the making. And this time, I wouldn't be the one backing down. As I crawled into bed in the early hours of the new year, my mind was already formulating a plan. A plan that would reshape not just my marriage, but my entire life. The betrayal of this Christmas had been a turning point, and there was no going back. With these thoughts swirling in my mind, I drifted off to sleep, ready to face whatever the new year might bring. The old Emily was gone, and in her place stood a woman who was prepared to fight for her place in her own life, no matter the cost. The countdown to Daniel's return had begun, and with it, the countdown to a reckoning that would change everything. The days following New Year's passed in a blur of quiet determination. I spent my time planning, thinking, and steeling myself for the confrontation I knew was coming. Each passing day brought Daniel's return closer, and with it, the moment of reckoning that had been years in the making. On the morning of their scheduled return, I woke early, a knot of nervous energy in my stomach. I showered and dressed with care, choosing an outfit that made me feel strong and confident. As I stood in front of the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Gone was the meek, accommodating wife who had let herself be pushed aside. In her place stood someone new, someone ready to fight for her place in her own life. I made my way downstairs and positioned myself in the living room, facing the front door. The house was quiet, save for the steady ticking of the clock on the mantel, counting down the minutes until their arrival. I didn't have to wait long. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway sent a jolt through me. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. This was it. The moment of truth. The front door swung open, and there they were. Daniel entered first, looking tanned and relaxed, a stark contrast to the tension I felt coursing through my body. Behind him came Lillian, her designer luggage trailing behind her like an obedient pet. Emily. Daniel's face broke into a smile as he saw me, as if nothing was amiss. As if he hadn't just abandoned me for Christmas and gallivanted around Paris with his real family. How was your holiday? I met his gaze coolly. How was Paris? I asked, my voice steady and devoid of emotion. Daniel's smile faltered slightly, sensing the tension in the air. It was good. We had a great time. I wish you could have been there. I finished for him, my tone sharp. Funny, I was under the impression that I wasn't welcome. That I would ruin the vibe of your perfect family Christmas. Lillian, who had been bustling around with her bags, paused at my words. She turned to face me, her expression a mixture of surprise and indignation. Now, Emily, she began, her voice syrupy sweet, there's no need to be dramatic. We simply thought I know exactly what you thought. I cut her off, rising from my seat. You thought you could exclude me from my own family, that you could push me aside without consequences. Well, I'm here to tell you that you were wrong. Daniel stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Emily, come on. Let's not make this into a thing -oh, we already made it a thing. Daniel, I interrupted sharply. You made it a thing when you chose to leave me behind. When you posted all those pictures of your perfect family Christmas without a second thought about how it would make me feel. I turned to Lillian, who was watching me with narrowed eyes. And you, I said, my voice low and controlled, you've been living in our guest room for years, rent-free, constantly undermining our marriage. Well, that ends now. I want you out of this house. Today. Lillian's mouth fell open in shock. What? But I have nowhere else to go. I shrugged, unmoved by her plea. That's not my problem. You've had years to figure out your living situation. Your lack of planning doesn't constitute an emergency on my part. Daniel stepped between us, his face a mask of confusion and alarm. Emily, what are you saying? You can't just kick my mother out. I can, and I am, I replied firmly. And Daniel, you need to leave too. The silence that fell over the room was deafening. Daniel stared at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. Leave? But, this is our home. I shook my head slowly. No, Daniel. This stopped being our home the moment you chose your mother over me. The moment you decided that I wasn't family enough to be included in your Christmas plans. But I love you, Daniel protested weakly. Do you? I asked, my voice softening slightly. Because from where I'm standing, it doesn't look like love. It looks like you letting your mother disrespect me over and over again. It looks like you participating in that disrespect. That's not what love looks like, Daniel. That's not what marriage is supposed to be. Lillian, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly found her voice. This is ridiculous, she sputtered. Daniel, are you going to let her talk to us like this? After everything I've done for you both? I turned to her, my patience wearing thin. Everything you've done? You mean like constantly interfering in our marriage? Like making me feel unwelcome in my own home? Like convincing your son to exclude his wife from a family trip? Daniel looked between us, clearly torn. I could see the conflict playing out on his face, the dutiful son versus the husband he was supposed to be. But I was done waiting for him to choose. I was done being the understanding wife who always took a backseat to Lillian's demands. I want you both out, I repeated, my voice firm. You have until the end of the week to find somewhere else to stay. After that, I'm changing the locks. You can't do this, Lillian protested. Daniel, tell her she can't do this. But Daniel remained silent, the reality of the situation finally seeming to sink in. He looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. Emily, he said softly, can't we talk about this? Can't we work things out? I felt a pang in my heart at the plea in his voice, but I steeled myself against it. We're beyond talking, Daniel. We're beyond working things out. You've made your choice, time and time again. Now it's time for me to make mine. With that, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving them standing there in stunned silence. As I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, my bedroom now, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I was putting myself first. It hurt, yes, but it also felt incredibly freeing. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. True to my word, I ignored the constant stream of calls and texts from both Daniel and Lillian. They alternated between apologizing, guilt-tripping, and accusing me of being unreasonable, but I stood firm in my decision. Daniel showed up at the door twice, pleading to be let in, to talk things through. But I refused to engage. The only words I spoke to him, through the closed door, were, "This house is mine now, Daniel. You made your choice when you walked out with her. Now live with it." As the week drew to a close, I watched from the window as Daniel and Lillian loaded their belongings into their cars. Lillian shot me a venomous glare as she got into her vehicle, but I met her gaze unflinchingly. Daniel lingered for a moment, looking up at the house, our house, with a mix of regret and disbelief. For a moment, I thought he might try one last time to change my mind. But then he got into his car and drove away. As their cars disappeared down the street, I felt a strange mix of emotions wash over me. There was sadness. Yes, the end of a marriage, no matter how troubled, is always a loss. But there was also an overwhelming sense of relief, and underneath it all, a spark of excitement for what the future might hold. I spent that evening reconnecting with friends I had neglected during my marriage. I called Sarah, apologizing for missing her New Year's party and explaining everything that had happened. She was shocked but supportive, offering to come over with wine and a shoulder to cry on if I needed it. But surprisingly, I didn't feel like crying. Instead, I found myself making plans. I signed up for a local book club I'd always been interested in but never had time for. I looked into yoga classes at the community center. For the first time in years, I was thinking about what I wanted, what would make me happy. As I crawled into bed that night, in a house that was truly mine for the first time, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, I knew that. There would be legal battles to face, difficult conversations to have, and a lot of healing to do. But for the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to the future. I had rediscovered my strength, my voice, and my sense of self-worth. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, I knew I was ready to face them. As I drifted off to sleep, I smiled to myself. It wasn't the Christmas I had planned, but it was the wake-up call I needed. And in its own way, it was the best gift I could have received, the gift of a fresh start, and the chance to build a life on my own terms. Little did I know, the journey I had embarked on was far from over. The weeks ahead would bring new challenges, unexpected twists, and the ultimate test of my newfound strength. But that night, in the quiet of my home, I slept peacefully, ready to embrace whatever the future might bring. The days following Daniel and Lillian's departure were surreal. The house, once filled with tension and resentment, now echoed with a strange, unfamiliar silence. At first, I found myself jumping at every small noise, half expecting to hear Daniel's key in the lock or Lillian's voice calling out from the guest room. But as the days passed, I began to settle into this new reality. My phone, however, was far from silent. It buzzed constantly with messages and calls from both Daniel and Lillian. I watched as their tactics evolved, cycling through various stages of grief and manipulation. At first, there were the apologetic messages from Daniel. "Emily, please, can we talk about this? I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I love you. We can work this out." Then came the guilt-tripping. "How could you do this to us? After everything we've been through? My mother is devastated. She has nowhere to go. I thought our marriage meant more to you than this." And finally, the anger. "You're being completely unreasonable. You can't just throw away our marriage like this. I can't believe you're acting this way. This isn't the Emily I married." Lillian's messages were a mix of faux concern and thinly veiled threats. "Emily, dear, I'm worried about you. This behavior isn't like you at all. You know, Daniel is heartbroken. Is that what you want? I hope you realize what you're throwing away. You'll regret this." But I stood firm in my decision. I didn't respond to a single message or answer a single call. Each ignored notification felt like a small victory, a reaffirmation of my newfound strength. One evening, about a week after they left, I heard a commotion outside. Peering through the curtains, I saw Daniel standing on the front lawn, clearly intoxicated, shouting up at the house. "Emily," he called, his words slurring slightly. "Emily, please, just talk to me." For a moment, my heart ached. This was the man I had loved, the man I had built a life with. But then I remembered the hurt, the betrayal, the years of putting his mother's feelings before mine. I stepped away from the window and turned up the volume on the TV, drowning out his pleas. The next morning, I found a handwritten note slipped under the door. Daniel's usually neat handwriting was shaky and uneven. "I'm sorry about last night. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. I miss you. Can we please just talk? I'll do anything. Please." I read the note twice, then crumpled it up and threw it in the trash. The old Emily might have wavered, might have been tempted to give in. But I wasn't that Emily anymore. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself settling into a new routine. I threw myself into the activities I had always wanted to try but never had the time for. The book club I joined turned out to be a highlight of my week. We met every Thursday evening at a cozy little coffee shop downtown, discussing everything from classic literature to the latest bestsellers. It was at one of these meetings that I met Sophia, a vivacious woman in her 50s with a shock of silver hair and a wicked sense of humor. After the meeting, as we were all gathering our things to leave, she approached me. You know, she said, her eyes twinkling, I couldn't help but notice you're not wearing a wedding ring anymore. I instinctively touched my bare ring finger, feeling a pang of something. Not quite sadness, not quite regret. Just a dull ache of what used to be. It's a recent development, I admitted. Sophia nodded knowingly. I've been there, honey. Kicked my ex to the curb 5 years ago. Best decision I ever made. She leaned in conspiratorially. Want to grab a drink? I know a great little wine bar around the corner. I hesitated for a moment, then surprised myself by agreeing. As we settled into a cozy booth at the wine bar, glasses of rich red wine in front of us, I found myself opening up to Sophia in a way I hadn't with anyone else since this whole ordeal began. I told her everything about Daniel's betrayal, about Lillian's constant interference, about my decision to reclaim my life. Sophia listened intently, nodding in understanding and occasionally interjecting with a supportive comment or a wry observation. You know what, Emily, she said when I had finished my story. You're a hell of a lot stronger than you give yourself credit for. Most people would have caved by now, gone running back to the comfort of the familiar. But not you. You're fighting for yourself, and that's something to be proud of. Her words warmed me more than the wine ever could. For the first time in weeks, I felt truly seen and understood. As I walked home that night, I felt a lightness in my step that hadn't been there before. The house didn't seem quite so empty anymore. Instead, it felt full of possibility. The next morning, I woke up to find an email from Daniel. Unlike his previous messages, this one was calm and measured. Emily, I understand that you need space right now, and I'm trying to respect that. But we need to discuss practical matters. There are bills to be paid, accounts to be sorted out. We can't avoid this forever. I've spoken to a mediator who can help us work through these issues without having to go straight to lawyers. Would you be willing to meet with them? We don't have to see each other if you don't want to. We can arrange separate meetings. Please let me know. Daniel, I read the email several times, considering my response. Part of me wanted to continue the silent treatment, to make him sweat a little longer. But I knew he was right. We couldn't avoid the practical aspects of our separation forever. After careful consideration, I typed out a brief reply. Daniel, I'm willing to meet with the mediator. Separate meetings would be preferable for now. Have them contact me directly to arrange a time. Emily, as I hit send, I felt a small sense of accomplishment. I had maintained my boundaries while also taking a step towards resolving our situation. It was progress, even if it was small. The weeks continued to pass, and I found myself growing more comfortable in my new life. I threw myself into my yoga classes, relishing the way they helped me feel strong and centered. I started exploring new recipes, filling the house with the aromas of exotic spices and freshly baked bread. One Saturday morning, as I was leaving for my weekly farmer's market trip, I ran into our neighbor, Mrs. Thompson. She was an elderly widow who had lived next door for as long as I could remember, always quick with a smile and a wave. Emily, dear, she called out. I haven't seen Daniel in a while. Is everything all right? For a moment, I froze, unsure of how to respond. But then I took a deep breath and decided to be honest. Daniel and I are separated, Mrs. Thompson, I said, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. He's not living here anymore. Mrs. Thompson's eyes widened in surprise, then softened with understanding. Oh, my dear, she said gently. I'm so sorry. Are you doing okay? I thought about it for a moment, then smiled. You know what? I really am. It's been tough, but I'm doing okay. As I continued on my way to the market, I realized that I meant it. I was doing okay. More than okay, actually. I was rediscovering myself, piece by piece. That evening, as I prepared a meal just for myself, a luxury I was still getting used to, my phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. Hey, warrior woman. Some of us are getting together for a girls' night next Friday. You in? I smiled as I typed my reply. Absolutely. Count me in. As I sat down to enjoy my dinner, I felt a sense of contentment wash over me. The house was quiet, yes, but it was no longer lonely. It was peaceful. And I was starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, this was exactly where I needed to be. The journey ahead was still uncertain. There were still challenges to face, difficult conversations to be had. But for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face whatever came my way. The silent treatment wasn't just about ignoring Daniel and Lillian, it was about listening to my own voice, my own needs, my own desires. And that voice was getting stronger every day. As January gave way to February, I noticed a shift in the tone of Daniel's attempts to reach me. The anger and indignation that had colored his earlier messages began to fade, replaced by something that sounded a lot like desperation. One chilly morning, as I was sipping my coffee and scrolling through my emails, I found a message from Daniel that was different from the rest. It wasn't a hastily typed text or a voicemail left in the heat of the moment. This was a carefully crafted letter, sent as an attachment to an email with the subject line, "Please read this, Emily." With a mix of curiosity and apprehension, I opened the attachment. The letter was long, filled with words of remorse and regret. "Dear Emily, I've started this letter 100 times, but the words never seem right. How do I begin to express the depth of my regret, the enormity of my mistake? But I have to try, because the thought of losing you forever is unbearable. I've been a fool, Emily. A blind, selfish fool. I let my mother's manipulations cloud my judgment, allowed her to come between us time and time again. I chose her happiness over yours, her comfort over our marriage. And in doing so, I've hurt the one person I promised to cherish above all others. I miss you. I miss your laugh, your smile, the way you scrunch up your nose when you're concentrating. I miss the sound of your voice, even when you're angry with me. Because even your anger is better than this silence. I understand now how much I've taken you for granted. How I've failed to appreciate your strength, your patience, your unwavering support. You've been the rock of our marriage, Emily, and I've been too weak to stand beside you. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I've broken your trust in ways that might be irreparable. But I'm asking, no, I'm begging, for a chance to make things right. To show you that I can be the husband you deserve. I'll do anything, Emily. If you want me to cut ties with my mother, I'll do it. If you want me to move out permanently, to give you space and time, I'll do that too. Whatever it takes to show you how serious I am about fixing this. Please, Emily. Just talk to me. Give me a chance to prove that I can change, that I can be better. I love you, and I can't bear the thought of a life without you in it. Yours always, Daniel. I read the letter twice, then a third time, my coffee growing cold beside me. Each word seemed to carry the weight of Daniel's desperation, his fear of losing me for good. And despite everything, despite the anger and hurt I'd been carrying for weeks, I felt a twinge of something in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the tiniest crack in the wall I'd built around my heart. But I wasn't ready to respond. Not yet. I needed time to process, to think about what this meant for me, for us. As the days passed, I noticed a change in Lillian's behavior as well. Her messages, once filled with thinly veiled accusations and attempts to guilt-trip me, took on a different tone. She began to plead, to beg for understanding. Emily, dear, I know I've made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. I never meant to come between you and Daniel. Please, can we talk? Can we try to work this out? I don't want to lose my son, and I don't want to lose you either. Your family, Emily. Please give us another chance. It was jarring to see Lillian, always so proud and self-assured, reduced to begging. Part of me felt a grim satisfaction at seeing her brought low, but another part, a part one wasn't entirely comfortable with, felt a twinge of pity. One evening, as I was leaving my yoga class, I found Lillian waiting for me in the parking lot. She looked smaller somehow, her usually impeccable appearance slightly disheveled. When she saw me, her eyes lit up with a mixture of hope and fear. Emily, she said, her voice wavering. Please, just give me 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. I hesitated, my hand tightening on my yoga mat. Every instinct told me to walk away, to maintain the distance I'd worked so hard to establish. But something in Lillian's demeanor, the raw vulnerability in her eyes, made me pause. 5 minutes, I said, my voice cool. That's all. Lillian nodded gratefully, and we moved to a nearby bench. She twisted her hands in her lap, seemingly at a loss for words now that she had my attention. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she finally began. "About the way I've behaved, the things I've said and done. And I realize now how wrong I've been." I remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "I was jealous," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jealous of the relationship you had with Daniel. After his father died, Daniel was all I had left. And I was terrified of losing him too. So I clung too tightly, tried to keep him close in all the wrong ways." She looked up at me, her eyes brimming with tears. "But in trying to keep him, I've ended up pushing him away. And I've hurt you in the process. I can see that now, and I'm truly, deeply sorry." I took a deep breath, processing her words. It was the first time I'd ever heard Lillian admit to being wrong, to feeling vulnerable. But was it enough? Could it make up for years of interference and manipulation? "I appreciate your apology, Lillian," I said carefully. "But it doesn't erase everything that's happened. It doesn't change the fact that Daniel chose to exclude me from our family Christmas, or that he's consistently put your feelings above our marriage." Lillian nodded, wiping at her eyes. "I know. And I take responsibility for my part in that. But Emily, Daniel loves you. He's miserable without you. We both are. Isn't there any chance you could consider giving him, another chance?" I stood up, signaling the end of our conversation. "I need time, Lillian. Time to think, to process everything that's happened. I can't make any promises right now." As I walked away, I heard Lillian call out behind me, "We miss you, Emily." "We both do." Her words followed me home, echoing in my mind as I tried to sort through my tumultuous emotions. The quiet confidence I'd been cultivating over the past weeks felt shaken. Was I being too harsh? Too unforgiving? That night, I found myself unable to sleep, tossing and turning as I replayed Daniel's letter and Lillian's apology in my mind. Around 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep and padded downstairs to make some tea. As I sat at the kitchen table, cradling my mug of chamomile, I let my gaze wander around the room. It fell on the refrigerator, where a photo of Daniel and me from our honeymoon still hung. We looked so young, so happy, so in love. Where had that couple gone? For the first time since this all began, I allowed myself to really consider the possibility of reconciliation. Not just going back to the way things were, that wasn't an option. But maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward. A way to rebuild on new, stronger foundations. But was I ready for that? Was Daniel truly capable of change? And could I ever trust Lillian again? As the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, I still didn't have any answers. But I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't keep avoiding this forever. It was time to face Daniel, to have the conversation we'd been dancing around for weeks. With shaking hands, I picked up my phone and composed a text: "We need to talk. Meet me at the coffee shop on Main Street tomorrow at 2 p.m. I hit send before I could second-guess myself, then watched as the message status changed from delivered to read almost instantly. Seconds later, a reply came through: "I'll be there. Thank you, Emily." As I set my phone down, I felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation swirling in my stomach. Tomorrow would be a turning point, one way or another. Whatever happened, there was no going back now. I spent the rest of the day in a haze of nervous energy, alternating between bouts of furious cleaning, always my go-to when stressed, and long periods of sitting motionless, staring into space as I tried to imagine every possible scenario for tomorrow's meeting. By the time I crawled into bed that night, I was exhausted but wide awake. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I found myself whispering a quiet prayer, not for any specific outcome, but for the strength to face whatever tomorrow might bring. Little did I know, the conversation awaiting me would challenge everything I thought I knew about myself, my marriage, and the path forward. The stage was set for a confrontation that would either mend what was broken or shatter it beyond repair. And as I drifted off into an uneasy sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would be the day that would define the rest of my life. The morning of my meeting with Daniel dawned bright and crisp, a perfect New England winter day. I woke early, my stomach a knot of anxiety and anticipation. As I went through my morning routine, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror. The woman staring back at me looked different, somehow older, perhaps, but also stronger. More resolute. Whatever happened today, I knew I was ready to face it. I arrived at the coffee shop on Main Street 20 minutes early, choosing a quiet corner table where I could see the door. As I waited, nursing a latte, I watched the regular Thursday afternoon crowd come and go, college students with laptops, business people on their lunch breaks, young mothers with strollers. Their normalcy felt surreal against the backdrop of my churning emotions. At precisely 2 p.m., the bell above the door chimed, and Daniel walked in. He looked different. Thinner, maybe, with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. His gaze swept the room, landing on me with a mix of relief and apprehension. As he made his way to the table, I took a deep breath, steeling myself. This was it. The moment of truth. "Emily," he said softly as he sat down across from me. "Thank you for meeting me." I nodded, not quite trusting my voice yet. Up close, the changes in Daniel were even more apparent. He looked haggard, worn down in a way I'd never seen before. "Can I get you a coffee?" I offered, more out of habit than anything else. He shook his head. "No, thanks. I'm too nervous to drink anything right now." An awkward silence fell between us. Where do you start when there's so much to say? Finally, Daniel spoke. "Emily, I don't even know where to begin. I'm so sorry. For everything. For the trip, for letting my mother come between us, for not being the husband you deserve." I listened quietly, my hands wrapped around my coffee mug, drawing strength from its warmth. "I've done a lot of thinking these past weeks," he continued. "About our marriage, about my relationship with my mother, about the kind of man I want to be. And I realize now how badly I've messed up." He reached across the table, as if to take my hand, then seemed to think better of it and pulled back. "I miss you, Em. More than I can say. Our house, it's not a home without you in it." I took a deep breath, carefully considering my words. "I miss you too, Daniel. But missing each other isn't enough. What happened over Christmas, it wasn't just a one-time thing. It was the culmination of years of you putting your mother's feelings above our marriage." Daniel nodded, his eyes downcast. "I know. And I can't tell you how much I regret that. I've always struggled with standing up to my mom, with setting boundaries. But that's no excuse. I should have been stronger. For you. For us." "Yes, you should have," I agreed, my voice firm but not unkind. "Daniel, when we got married, we promised to choose each other, every day. But for a long time now, it's felt like I'm the only one making that choice." He looked up at me then, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. "You're right. And I want to make it right, Emily. I'll do whatever it takes. I've already told my mother she needs to find her own place to live. I'm in therapy, trying to work through my issues with boundaries and standing up for myself. I want to be better. For you. For us." I felt a lump form in my throat. This was the Daniel I'd fallen in love with, vulnerable, honest, willing to work on himself. But was it too little, too late? "I appreciate that, Daniel. I really do. But I need you to understand something," I said, leaning forward. "This isn't just about your mother. It's about trust. It's about feeling valued and respected in my own marriage. And right now, I'm not sure if those things can be rebuilt." Daniel nodded slowly, a tear finally escaping and rolling down his cheek. "I understand. And I know I have no right to ask this, but is there any chance at all that you might be willing to try? To see if we can rebuild?" I closed my eyes for a moment, listening to my heart. When I opened them again, I knew what I had to say. "I can't give you an answer right now, Daniel. I need time. Time to think, to process everything that's happened. And it's a big if, we do try again, things would have to be different. Really different." Hope flickered in Daniel's eyes. "Of course. Anything you need, Emily. I'm willing to do whatever it takes." We talked for another hour, hashing out the hurts of the past, the challenges of the present, and the uncertainties of the future. By the time we left the coffee shop, we had agreed to a trial separation. 3 months, during which we would both attend individual therapy and meet once a week for dinner to check in with each other. As we stood outside the coffee shop, preparing to go our separate ways, Daniel turned to me. "Thank you, Emily, for giving me this chance. I promise I won't let you down again." I gave him a small smile. "Don't make promises, Daniel. Just do the work. That's all I ask." He nodded, and for a moment, I thought he might try to hug me or kiss my cheek. But he simply gave me one last look, filled with a mixture of hope and determination, before turning and walking away. I watched him go, a whirlwind of emotions swirling inside me. Relief at having finally had this conversation. Anxiety about the uncertain future ahead. And, surprisingly, a small spark of hope. Not certainty, not by any means, but hope. The weeks that followed were a roller coaster of emotions. Daniel and I stuck to our agreement, meeting each week for dinner. At first, our conversations were stilted, awkward. But as time went on, we began to rediscover the easy rapport we'd once shared. I watched as Daniel worked hard in therapy, confronting his issues with his mother and learning to set healthy boundaries. He moved out of his mother's place and into a small apartment of his own, a big step for him, and one that didn't go unnoticed by me. Lillian, for her part, seemed to be making an effort too. She stopped calling and texting incessantly, instead sending a single, heartfelt email apologizing for her behavior and expressing her hope that, in time, we might be able to rebuild our relationship. As for me, I continued to focus on my own growth. My book club became a cherished part of my routine, and my friendship with Sophia deepened. I threw myself into my work, even earning a promotion that I might not have had the confidence to pursue before. 3 months passed more quickly than I could have imagined. Before I knew it, Daniel and I were sitting in a restaurant, marking the end of our agreed-upon separation period. "So," Daniel said, after we'd ordered our meals, "it's been 3 months." I nodded, feeling a flutter of nerves in my stomach. "It has. I know I said I wouldn't make any promises," Daniel continued, "but I hope I've shown you, through my actions, how committed I am to changing. To being better." I took a sip of my wine, considering my words carefully. "You have, Daniel. I've seen the changes you've made, and I'm proud of you for doing the work." He smiled, a tentative, hopeful expression. "So where does that leave us?" I took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth. I think I'm willing to try again. To see if we can rebuild our marriage on a stronger foundation." The relief and joy that spread across Daniel's face was almost palpable. But before he could speak, I held up a hand. "But I need you to understand something, Daniel. This isn't a return to the way things were. We're starting over, building something new. And it's going to take time and work from both of us." He nodded earnestly. "I understand, Emily. And I'm ready for that work. More than ready." As we finished our meal, talking and laughing more freely than we had in months, I felt a warmth spreading through my chest. Not the giddy excitement of new love, but something deeper, more mature. The warmth of hope, of possibility, of a love that had been tested and was emerging stronger. Walking home that night, I reflected on the journey of the past few months. The pain, the growth, the difficult decisions. And I realized something profound: the Christmas that I thought had ruined everything had, in its own way, been a gift. A wake-up call that forced us to confront the issues in our marriage, to grow as individuals, and to choose each other all over again. As I unlocked the door to our house, our home, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The future was still uncertain, the road ahead still long. But for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see where it might lead. I stepped inside, leaving the door open behind me. A moment later, I heard Daniel's footsteps as he followed me in. As we stood in the entryway, looking at each other in the soft light, I felt like we were on the threshold of something new. Something stronger. Something built on mutual respect, open communication, and a deep, abiding love. "Welcome home," I said softly. Daniel smiled, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "It's good to be home," he replied. And as we moved further into the house together, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them as a team. Because this time, we were both choosing each other. Every day. The journey hadn't been easy, and it wasn't over yet. But as I looked at Daniel, saw the love and determination in his eyes, I knew that it had been worth it. We had been worth it. And whatever the future held, we would face it together, stronger for having weathered the storm. It wasn't the Christmas I had planned, but it turned out to be the gift I needed most, the gift of growth, of self-discovery, and of a love renewed.